The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Colorado Territory, 1876, as Molly Zane dove behind a fallen log, her heart racing in her chest. She had never expected her journey west to turn into a fight for her life. 3 days on the run from Silas Garrett's gang. With nothing but the clothes on her back and her father's pocket, watched the last piece of her old life in Boston. Her blonde hair, once elegantly styled, now hung in tangled strands around her dirt-streaked face as she listened to the approaching hoofbeats. "Come on out, pretty lady," a gruff voice called. "We just want what your daddy stole from us." Molly bit her lip to keep from crying out. Her father had been a banker, not a thief. Whatever these men believed, they were wrong, but they'd already proven they wouldn't listen to reason when they'd burned down her family's homestead 3 nights ago. The riders were getting closer. She could hear them dismounting, boots crunching on the dry earth and sparse grass. Molly clutched the small derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt. 2 shots, not enough to save her from 3 armed men, but maybe enough to take 1 or 2 with her. "Check behind that log, Hank," the same voice ordered. Molly closed her eyes, steadying her breathing as she prepared to face her fate. But then came new hoofbeats, thundering fast, followed by 3 rapid gunshots that split the air. "What the hell?" The outlaw's words were cut short by another shot. Molly stayed frozen, uncertain if this new arrival was friend or just another enemy. After several moments of shouting and more gunfire, an eerie silence fell. She tightened her grip on the derringer, finger trembling against the trigger. "Madam," a deep voice different from the others called out, "if you're behind that log, you can come out now. They're gone." Molly remained still, not willing to trust so easily. "I ain't gonna hurt you," the voice continued, "but we should move on. There might be more of Garrett's boys nearby." The mention of Garrett's name made Molly's breath catch. Slowly, she peered over the edge of the log. A tall man stood about 20 feet away, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He held the reins of a magnificent chestnut horse in one hand and a Winchester rifle in the other. 2 bodies lay on the ground behind him, while a third man was riding away at full gallop. "How do I know you're not one of them?" Molly called, keeping her derringer raised. The man sighed and holstered his pistol, though he kept the rifle ready. "Name's Lucas Owens. I've been tracking Garrett's gang for 2 weeks. They've been terrorizing homesteaders all through this territory." He gestured to the fleeing rider. "That's Pete Miller. He'll be bringing back friends, so we need to move." Something in his steady gaze made Molly lower her gun slightly. "Where would we go?" "Wilson's about 15 miles northwest. I've got a place near there." He studied her disheveled appearance. "You look like you could use a meal and some rest." Molly hesitated only a moment longer before emerging from her hiding place. Up close, she could see Lucas Owens more clearly, broad-shouldered, with 3 days' worth of stubble on his sun-weathered face and eyes the color of a summer storm. A star-shaped badge glinted on his vest. "You're a lawman," she said, relief flooding through her. "Former U.S. Marshal," he corrected. "Now I just hunt bounties when the need arises." He eyed her small frame. "Can you ride?" "I grew up in Boston, Mr. Owens, not on the moon. Yes, I can ride." A brief smile crossed his face, softening his hard features. "Good." He whistled, and a second horse, a dappled gray, trotted into view. "This is Smoke. She's gentle enough." As Lucas helped her mount, Molly noticed the careful way he moved, like a man who'd learned the hard way to always be watching his surroundings. "Thank you for saving my life, Mr. Owens." "Lucas," he corrected, swinging onto his own horse with practiced ease. "And you are Molly Zane. Well, Miss Zane, let's get you somewhere safe before Garrett's men return." They rode hard for the first hour, following game trails and cutting across open country rather than using the main road. Lucas set a pace that was brisk, but not punishing, occasionally glancing back to ensure no one was following. Molly found herself studying his broad back, the set of his shoulders beneath his dusty denim jacket. Despite her exhaustion, she felt safer than she had in days. When they finally slowed to rest the horses by a small creek, Molly slid from the saddle, her legs trembling from the exertion. "Not bad riding for a city girl," Lucas commented, offering her his canteen. Molly accepted it gratefully. "My father believed in a well-rounded education. He said a lady should be able to dance a waltz and ride a horse with equal grace." The memory of her father brought a fresh wave of grief, and she turned away quickly. Lucas pretended not to notice her tears. Instead, he busied himself checking the horses while giving her a moment to compose herself. "These men," he finally said, "they're after you specifically." Molly wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "They think my father had something that belonged to them. Garrett kept shouting about a map while they—" She swallowed hard. "While they burned our home." "A map," Lucas frowned. "To what? I don't know. My father was a banker. He came west to establish a new branch in Denver 6 months ago. I only joined him last month after finishing my schooling." She shook her head. "He never mentioned any map to me." Lucas nodded slowly. "Silas Garrett doesn't chase fairy tales. If he thinks your father had something valuable, he likely did." He handed her a piece of jerky from his saddlebag. "Eat. We've still got a ways to go." As they continued their journey, the landscape gradually changed. The open plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Lucas pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled in the valley below. "Wilson," he said. "Small but decent enough. Got a general store, blacksmith, saloon, even a schoolhouse now." There was a hint of pride in his voice. "You live in town?" Molly asked. Lucas shook his head. "Got a ranch about 3 miles outside. It's not much, but it's private." He glanced at her. "I'll take you to the hotel first. Mrs. Peterson runs it. She's a good woman. She can help you get cleaned up, maybe find some clothes." "No," Molly said firmly. "If these men are still looking for me, I don't want to endanger the town. Your ranch would be safer, at least until I figure out what to do next." Lucas studied her for a long moment. "It's not proper, a single lady staying at a man's home." Molly laughed, the sound surprising them both. "Mr. Owens, I've spent 3 days running for my life through the wilderness. I think propriety is the least of my concerns right now." A hint of a smile tugged at his lips. "Fair point. My place it is, then." The sun was setting by the time they reached Lucas's ranch. The main house was a sturdy, 2-story structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A large barn stood nearby, along with a corral and a smaller bunkhouse. Several cattle grazed in the distance, and chickens scattered as they rode into the yard. "You live here alone?" Molly asked, taking in the size of the operation. "Got a ranch hand, Miguel, who helps with the cattle. He stays in the bunkhouse with his son." Lucas dismounted and helped her down from Smoke. "They're in town tonight for supplies." Inside, the house was surprisingly well kept for a bachelor's dwelling. The main room had a large stone fireplace, comfortable-looking furniture, and bookshelves lined with more volumes than Molly would have expected. She noticed a few feminine touches: curtains on the windows, a colorful quilt draped over a rocking chair that seemed at odds with Lucas's rugged appearance. Noticing her gaze, Lucas said quietly, "My sister stayed with me for a while after her husband died. She left those things when she moved on to California last year." "It's lovely," Molly said sincerely. Lucas cleared his throat. "There's a bedroom upstairs you can use. Bathroom's down the hall. I've got a pump inside, so you don't need to haul water from the well. I'll get a fire going and heat some for you to wash up." True to his word, within the hour Molly found herself soaking in a copper tub filled with gloriously warm water. Lucas had left clean towels and a nightgown with a robe that he said had belonged to his sister. After washing away days of grime and fear, Molly felt almost human again. When she descended the stairs, dressed in the borrowed nightgown and robe, she found Lucas in the kitchen, stirring something that smelled wonderful on the stove. "Just stew," he said, seeming almost embarrassed. "Nothing fancy, but it's filling." They ate at the kitchen table, the silence between them surprisingly comfortable. Lucas didn't press her for more information about her situation, and Molly was grateful for the reprieve. After days of constant fear, the simple act of sharing a meal in safety felt like an extraordinary luxury. As they finished eating, Lucas finally spoke. "Tomorrow, I'll ride into town and send a telegram to the Marshal in Denver. He might know something about what your father was involved in." "My father wasn't involved in anything," Molly said sharply. "He was an honest man." Lucas held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Poor choice of words. I meant he might know what Garrett thinks your father had." Molly nodded, mollified. "I'm sorry, it's just seeing those men burn our home, hearing them laugh as everything we'd built turned to ash." She stared down at her empty bowl. "I still don't understand any of this." "We'll figure it out," Lucas said, his deep voice reassuring. "For now, you should get some rest. You're safe here." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Molly thought about the strange turns her life had taken. A month ago, she'd been in Boston, preparing to join her father in what was supposed to be a new chapter of their lives. Now her father was dead, their home destroyed, and she was dependent on the kindness of a stranger. A handsome stranger, she had to admit, but one whose eyes held secrets and sorrows she couldn't begin to fathom. Sleep came surprisingly easily, the exhaustion of the past days finally catching up with her. She dreamed of running through endless fields, pursued by faceless men, until a thunderstorm with eyes the color of Lucas Owens's rolled in and washed them all away. Morning brought the sounds of activity from downstairs. Molly dressed in her own clothes, which Lucas had somehow managed to wash and mend overnight, and followed the smell of coffee to the kitchen. Lucas stood at the stove, frying bacon and eggs. A dark-haired man and a boy of about 12 sat at the table, both looking up curiously as she entered. "Ah, Miss Zane," Lucas said, turning from the stove. "This is Miguel Vasquez and his son Tomás. They help me run this place." Miguel stood and gave a polite nod. "Señorita." "It is good to meet you." Tomás simply stared, wide-eyed, until his father nudged him. "Buenos dias," the boy mumbled, ducking his head. "Miguel and Tomás are heading out to check the north pasture today," Lucas explained as he served up breakfast. "I'll be riding into town for those telegrams." "I'd like to come with you," Molly said. Lucas frowned. "That might not be wise. Garrett's men could be watching the town." "I need clothes, Mr. Owens. I can't keep wearing the same dress, and while your sister's nightgown is appreciated, it's hardly suitable for daytime." Miguel coughed to hide a smile, and Tomás looked scandalized at the mention of nightgowns. Lucas's ears reddened slightly. "Besides," Molly continued, "I refuse to hide away in fear. If I'm going to start a new life here, I need to learn my way around." Lucas studied her determined expression and sighed. "All right, but we'll be careful. We'll say you're my cousin, come to visit from back east." After breakfast, Miguel and Tomás headed out to their work while Lucas saddled the horses for the trip to town. Before they left, he disappeared into his room and returned with a pistol, smaller than the one he wore on his hip. "Ever fired one of these?" he asked, holding it out to Molly. Only my Derringer and not very well, she admitted. Lucas nodded. This is a Colt pocket. 5 shots, easier to handle than that Derringer. Keep it hidden in your skirts but accessible. He showed her how to load and fire it, his hands steady as they guided hers through the motions. I hope I never have to use it, Molly said as she tucked the weapon into a pocket sewn into her petticoat. So do I, Lucas agreed grimly. But in this territory, hope isn't always enough. Wilson proved to be exactly as Lucas had described, small but respectable. With all the necessities and little of the garish excess Molly had read about in dime novels about western towns. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with wooden buildings painted in weathered colors. A few horses stood hitched outside the general store and the saloon, which bore the name The Silver Dollar in faded lettering. Lucas took her first to the telegraph office, where he sent messages to contacts in Denver and other towns, inquiring about Garrett's gang and any news related to Franklin Zane. The operator, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, gave Molly a sympathetic look when Lucas briefly explained she'd lost her father recently. Your reply might take a day or two, the operator told them. Marshal Johnson's been out tracking horse thieves near Boulder. Their next stop was the general store, a large establishment crammed with everything from tools and ammunition to fabric and ready-made clothing. The proprietor, a round woman with keen eyes, looked Molly up and down assessingly. Mrs. Wilson, this is my cousin, Molly Zane, Lucas said. She's come to stay with me for a while, but her luggage was lost on the journey. She needs everything, clothes, toiletries, the works. Mrs. Wilson's face softened into a welcoming smile. Well now, we can certainly help with that. Come along, dear. We'll get you fixed right up. For the next hour, Molly was measured, fitted, and generally fussed over as Mrs. Wilson and her assistant pulled out dresses, undergarments, shoes, and all the necessities a lady might need. Lucas excused himself to handle other errands, looking relieved to escape the feminine domain. Your cousin is quite the catch, Mrs. Wilson remarked as she pinned the hem on a practical blue dress. Half the unmarried ladies in the county have set their caps for him since he settled here 3 years ago. Is that so? Molly murmured, unsure how to respond. Oh yes. Handsome, owns his own land, and those manners you can tell he was raised right, despite that rough exterior. The older woman glanced up at Molly. Of course, he never gives any of them the time of day. Keeps to himself, that one. Some folks think he's carrying a torch for someone from his past. Molly thought about the sadness she'd glimpsed in Lucas's eyes. Perhaps he is. Mrs. Wilson straightened up, pins clenched between her lips. After removing them, she said, well, whatever his reasons, it's good to see him bringing family around. That ranch of his is too big for a man alone. By the time Lucas returned, Molly had acquired 3 everyday dresses, 1 nicer dress for church or social occasions, appropriate undergarments, a nightgown, robe, boots, a shawl, and various toiletries. Lucas paid without comment, though his eyebrows rose slightly at the final tally. Mrs. Wilson has kindly invited us to Sunday services, Molly informed him as they loaded her packages onto their horses. Lucas's expression tightened. I don't much go in for church, Miss Zane. Well, I do, Molly replied firmly. And if I'm to be staying in your home, even temporarily, it would be proper for you to accompany me, unless you'd prefer the entire town to talk. Lucas looked like he wanted to argue, but instead sighed heavily. Sunday, then. They stopped at the town's small cafe for lunch, where Lucas was greeted with respectful nods by most patrons. A few curious glances were directed at Molly, but Lucas's presence seemed to discourage any direct questions. As they ate their meal of beef stew and fresh bread, Lucas leaned in closer. I asked around while you were shopping. No one's seen any strangers matching Garrett's men, but a couple of riders passed through yesterday asking questions about newcomers. Molly's appetite vanished. They're still looking for me. They're determined, I'll give them that. Lucas's jaw tightened. Whatever this map is supposed to lead to, Garrett wants it badly. I told you I don't know anything about a map, Molly said, frustrated. I believe you, Lucas assured her. But that doesn't mean your father didn't hide it somewhere you might have access to without realizing it. Molly frowned, thinking, the only thing of my father's I have is his pocket watch. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the silver timepiece. He gave it to me the night before. She swallowed hard. He said it was important that I keep it safe. Lucas carefully took the watch, turning it over in his hands. It was a handsome piece, well crafted but not ostentatious. May I? He asked, his finger poised to open the case. Molly nodded. Lucas opened the watch, examining the face and inner cover carefully. Nothing seemed unusual at first glance. The watch was ticking steadily, the face unmarked except for the manufacturer's name. He was about to close it when something caught his eye, a slight irregularity in the inner cover. Look here, he said quietly, tilting the watch so Molly could see. The lining of this cover doesn't quite fit. He ran his fingernail along the edge and found a tiny gap. There's something hidden inside. Molly's eyes widened. Can you open it? Lucas glanced around the cafe, ensuring no one was watching them closely. Not here. We'll look at it back at the ranch. They finished their meal quickly after that, both anxious to examine the watch more carefully. As they mounted up to leave town, Lucas noticed a rider watching them from the shade of an oak tree at the edge of town. The man wasn't obviously one of Garrett's gang, but something about his posture, too alert, too interested, raised Lucas's hackles. Don't look now, he murmured to Molly, but I think we're being watched. When we reach the edge of town, be ready to ride hard. Molly nodded slightly, her face composed though her knuckles whitened on the reins. They proceeded at a normal pace until they'd cleared the last buildings of Wilson. Then, without warning, Lucas spurred his horse into a gallop, and Molly followed suit. Behind them came a shout, then the sound of pursuing hoofbeats. Lucas led them off the main road onto a narrow trail that wound through dense trees. The path twisted and climbed, forcing them to slow slightly to navigate safely. The sounds of pursuit grew louder. There's a fork up ahead, Lucas called to Molly. When I signal, take the left path. I'll go right and circle back. Whoever's following will come after me. But Molly began to protest. Trust me, Lucas cut her off. The left path leads straight to the ranch. Miguel will be there. Tell him coyotes are hunting and he'll know what to do. Before Molly could argue further, they reached the fork. Lucas gave a sharp nod, and they split up, Molly to the left, Lucas to the right. As he'd predicted, the rider chose to follow him. Lucas pushed his horse hard for a few minutes, then abruptly reined in and dismounted, taking cover behind a large boulder with his rifle ready. The pursuing rider came around the bend at full speed, unprepared for the ambush. Lucas stepped out, rifle aimed squarely at the man's chest. That's far enough, he called. Hands where I can see them. The rider pulled up sharply, raising his hands. He was a lean man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes. Easy there, friend, just out for a ride. Is that why you've been following us since we left town? Lucas kept his rifle steady. Who are you working for? The man's eyes narrowed. Don't know what you're talking about, mister. I'm just passing through. Get down from that horse, slowly. Lucas's voice left no room for argument. The man complied, though his movements were stiff with tension. As his boots hit the ground, his hand darted toward his holster. Lucas fired a warning shot that kicked up dirt inches from the man's feet. Next one won't miss, Lucas warned. Now, let's try again. Who sent you? The man's face twisted in anger, but he seemed to reconsider his options. Garrett wants the girl, says she's got something that belongs to him. What's so important about this map? Lucas demanded. A sly look crossed the man's face. Valuable enough that he's offering 5,000 to whoever brings the girl and the map back. Lucas whistled low. Must lead to something mighty special. That ain't your concern, the man spat. Hand over the girl, and maybe Garrett won't burn your ranch like he did her daddy's place. Lucas's expression hardened. Here's what's going to happen instead. You're going to deliver a message to Garrett. Tell him the girl's under my protection now. If he or any of his men come within 10 miles of my property, they won't live to regret it. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. And you can tell him Lucas Owens sends his regards. The man's eyes widened in recognition of the name. Owens. The Marshal who took down the Clayton gang, former Marshal, Lucas corrected. Now get on that horse and ride. If I see you near Wilson again, I won't be so hospitable. The man mounted quickly, casting one last hateful glance at Lucas before galloping away. Lucas waited until he was out of sight before returning to his own horse. He took a roundabout route back to the ranch, ensuring he wasn't being followed. When he arrived, he found Miguel standing guard on the porch with a shotgun, while Tomás peered anxiously from a window. Molly rushed out as Lucas dismounted. "Thank God you're all right," she said, relief evident in her voice. "I was worried when you didn't return right away." "Had a little chat with our friend," Lucas explained, leading his horse toward the barn. "He works for Garrett all right. They're offering $5,000 for you and that watch." Molly paled. 5,000? What could possibly be so valuable? Let's find out. Lucas handed his horse's reins to Miguel, who had followed them to the barn. "Keep an eye out, amigo. There could be more of them around." Miguel nodded grimly. "Tomás and I will watch in shifts. No one will reach the house without us knowing." Inside, Lucas and Molly sat at the kitchen table with the pocket watch between them. Using a small knife, Lucas carefully worked at the edge of the inner cover where they'd noticed the irregularity. After several tense minutes, the lining came free, revealing a tightly folded piece of paper. Lucas gently extracted and unfolded it. It was indeed a map, hand-drawn in fine detail on thin parchment. It showed a section of mountains with a river running through a valley. X's marked several locations, with notations beside them. "These are mining claims," Lucas said, studying the markings. "And if I'm reading this right, they're in the Lost Creek Mountains, about 40 miles southwest of here." Molly leaned closer, her shoulder brushing against his as she examined the map. "What's so special about these claims? There are mines all over Colorado." Lucas pointed to some writing in the corner of the map. "According to this, these are silver claims that were never officially registered. Says here they were discovered by a prospector named William Holloway in 1873, but he died before filing the claims. So whoever has this map essentially owns unregistered silver mines?" Molly asked. "Potentially very valuable ones if these notes are accurate." Lucas traced the route marked on the map. "And they'd be in a remote area, easy to work without attracting attention from mining companies or the government." Molly sat back, her face troubled. "How did my father come to have this? He was a banker, not a prospector." "Maybe this Holloway had an account at your father's bank," Lucas suggested, "or left the map as collateral for a loan. Your father might have been trying to verify the claims before deciding what to do with the information. And Garrett found out somehow." Molly's eyes filled with tears. "My father died for this piece of paper." Lucas carefully refolded the map. "We need to keep this safe. If Garrett's willing to pay 5,000 for it, the mines must be worth many times that." "I don't want it," Molly said fiercely. "Not if it cost my father his life. Let Garrett have it." "It's not that simple," Lucas countered. "First, Garrett's a killer. Giving him more resources just means he can do more harm. Second, he's not likely to believe we've handed over the real map. And third," he hesitated, "your father gave this to you for safekeeping. He must have had a reason." Molly wiped away her tears, considering his words. "What do you suggest we do, then?" "For now, we hide the map somewhere safe. I sent telegrams to several lawmen who have been after Garrett. Once they respond, we'll have a better idea of how to proceed." Lucas reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "I promise you, Garrett will pay for what he did to your father." The simple touch of his hand sent an unexpected warmth through Molly. She looked up, meeting his storm-gray eyes, and saw determination there and something else, something that made her heart beat faster. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Lucas held her gaze for a long moment before gently withdrawing his hand. "You should get some rest. It's been a long day." That night, after securing the house and setting watch rotations with Miguel, Lucas sat alone in his study, examining the map more carefully. The silver deposits, if they were as rich as indicated, could be worth a fortune. But more than the potential wealth, it was the woman sleeping upstairs that occupied his thoughts. Molly Zane had shown remarkable courage throughout her ordeal. Most women who'd been through what she had would be collapsed in hysterics, but she'd faced each new challenge with determination and grace. Her quick thinking and refusal to be cowed impressed him more than he cared to admit. Lucas rubbed his tired eyes, aware he was treading dangerous ground. Getting attached to Molly would only complicate an already precarious situation. Once Garrett was dealt with, she'd likely return to civilization, to Boston or Denver, or somewhere equally unsuited to a solitary ex-lawman with too many ghosts haunting his past. Still, as he finally retired to his bedroom, Lucas couldn't help but notice how much warmer his home felt with her presence. The next few days established a tentative routine. Molly insisted on making herself useful, taking over the cooking and helping with household chores. Lucas continued his ranch work with Miguel, while keeping a vigilant eye on their surroundings. They saw no sign of Garrett's men, but Lucas didn't believe for a moment that the outlaw had given up. On the third morning, as Molly was gathering eggs from the henhouse, she heard a horse approaching. She ducked inside the barn, clutching the basket of eggs with one hand and reaching for her hidden pistol with the other. Peering through a gap in the boards, she saw a rider approaching the house, not one of Garrett's men, but the telegraph operator from Wilson. Lucas emerged from the corral to meet him. After a brief conversation and exchange of papers, the operator rode off. Lucas stood reading the telegram for a long moment, his expression grim, before heading toward the barn. "Molly," he called. "You in there?" She stepped out, lowering her pistol. "Is it news about Garrett?" Lucas nodded, handing her the telegram. "Marshal Johnson in Denver knows him well. Garrett used to run with a gang that robbed banks across Colorado and Wyoming. They caught most of the gang 2 years ago, but Garrett escaped with a significant portion of their takings." Molly scanned the telegram. "It says here he was a clerk at the Denver National Bank before turning to crime. That's where my father was establishing his new branch." "Which explains how Garrett knew about the map," Lucas concluded. "Your father must have discovered something about the claims while working at the bank and mentioned it to someone who got word back to Garrett." "The telegram says the Marshal is coming to Wilson next week," Molly noted. "Should we wait for him?" Lucas shook his head. "Johnson's a good man, but by the time he gets here, Garrett could have brought in more men. I think we need to move." "Move where?" Molly asked, alarmed. "To the mines." Lucas's eyes were determined. "If we can prove the claims are legitimate, we can register them officially." That would make the map worthless to Garrett. That's dangerous, Molly protested. We'd be exposed on the trail and we don't even know if the mines actually exist. It's risky, Lucas admitted, but staying here might be riskier. Garrett knows roughly where we are and he's had time to gather reinforcements. He stepped closer, his voice softening. I won't let anything happen to you, Molly. I swear it. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Over the past days, she'd become increasingly aware of Lucas as more than just her protector. She noticed the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders as he worked, how his rare smile transformed his serious face, the gentleness in his hands when he tended to injured animals. When would we leave? She asked, her decision already made. Tomorrow at dawn. We'll take Miguel and Tomás with us. I don't want to leave them here as potential hostages. We'll travel light and fast. The rest of the day was spent in careful preparation. Supplies were gathered, weapons cleaned, horses rested and fed. Lucas gave Molly more shooting lessons, impressed by how quickly she improved. By evening, they were as ready as they could be for the journey ahead. After dinner, as Miguel and Tomás retired to the bunkhouse to prepare their own gear, Lucas and Molly sat on the front porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The night was pleasantly cool, with a soft breeze carrying the scent of pine from the nearby hills. My father loved the stars, Molly said softly. In Boston, we couldn't see many because of the city lights and smoke, but he always said that out west, the heavens opened up to show their true glory. She smiled at the memory. I think that's part of why he wanted to come here to see these stars. Lucas leaned back in his chair, his profile strong against the faint light from the window. When I was riding with the Marshals, the stars were often my only companions. I'd be out for weeks, tracking some outlaw or another with just my horse and those lights to guide me home. Do you miss it? Being a marshal, Molly asked. Lucas was silent for a long moment. I miss the purpose, he finally said. Knowing exactly what I was meant to do each day, but I don't miss the killing. His voice grew quieter. There was too much of that. Molly studied his face, seeing the shadows of old pain there. Is that why you left, the killing? Partly. Lucas stared out at the darkness. My last assignment went wrong. Bad information led me into an ambush. My partner died, 3 innocent bystanders too. His hands tightened on the arms of his chair. I got the men responsible eventually, but it didn't bring anyone back. Instinctively, Molly reached over and placed her hand on his arm. It wasn't your fault. Doesn't make it any easier to live with. His eyes met hers, vulnerability showing through his usual reserve. After that, I couldn't wear the badge anymore. Bought this place, thought I'd live out my days tending cattle and minding my own business. And then I came along and dragged you back into danger, Molly said, starting to withdraw her hand. Lucas caught it gently in his own. No, you reminded me that sometimes fighting is necessary, that there are things people worth protecting. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, sending tingles up her arm. I don't regret helping you, Molly, not for a moment. They sat in silence, hands joined as the stars wheeled overhead. Later, Molly would look back on this quiet moment as the time she first admitted to herself that she was falling in love with Lucas Owens. Dawn broke clear and cool the next morning. By the time the first rays of sunlight crested the eastern hills, their small party was already several miles from the ranch. Lucas led the way, with Molly riding beside him. Miguel and Tomás followed, leading 2 pack horses loaded with supplies. Lucas had plotted their route carefully, avoiding main trails and settlements where possible. The first day's journey took them through rolling grasslands that gradually gave way to more rugged terrain. By evening, they were in the foothills of the mountains shown on the map. making camp in a sheltered draw beside a small creek. As they sat around the campfire after a simple dinner, Tamaz entertained them with a folktale his grandmother had taught him. The boys' animated storytelling brought smiles to everyone's faces, momentarily easing the tension of their situation. "You have a gift for stories, Tamaz," Molly told him when he finished. The boy ducked his head, pleased but embarrassed by the praise. "Abuela says stories keep our history alive. That a person with no stories is like a tree with no roots." "Your grandmother is a wise woman," Molly agreed. Miguel ruffled his son's hair affectionately. "She would like you, Señorita Zane. She always said that strong women are the backbone of any community." Lucas, who had been scanning the darkness beyond their camp, rejoined them by the fire. "We should turn in. Long day tomorrow, the terrain gets rougher from here." They established a watch rotation for the night, with Lucas taking the first shift. Molly settled into her bedroll, watching as Lucas's tall figure moved to sit on a rock overlooking their camp, rifle across his knees. Despite the uncertainty of their situation, she felt safe knowing he was watching over them. The second day brought steeper trails and denser forests. They followed game paths when possible, with Lucas occasionally consulting both the map and a compass to ensure they were heading in the right direction. By mid-afternoon, they had climbed high enough to look back over the valley they'd left behind. In the far distance, Molly could just make out the faint smudge that was Wilson. "We're making good time," Lucas said, coming to stand beside her at the overlook. "Another day should bring us to the first claim marked on the map." "And if the mines are real?" Molly asked. "Then we stake your claim officially, return to Wilson, and wait for Marshal Johnson. With legal ownership established and the law on our side, Garrett will have to back down or face a hangman's noose." Molly nodded, hoping it would be that simple. "And if the mines aren't real?" Lucas's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Then we're on a very tiring wild goose chase." His expression grew more serious. "But either way, we'll deal with Garrett. He won't hurt anyone else." They made camp that night in a small clearing surrounded by aspens. The white-barked trees rustled in the evening breeze, their leaves showing hints of the gold they would become in autumn. After dinner, Miguel took the first watch while the others prepared for sleep. Molly was just drifting off when a hand gently shook her shoulder. She opened her eyes to find Lucas kneeling beside her, his finger to his lips in a gesture for silence. He motioned for her to follow him, and she slipped out of her bedroll as quietly as possible. Once they were a short distance from the sleeping Tamaz, Lucas whispered, "Miguel spotted a campfire about a mile east of us. Could be Garrett's men." Molly's heart raced. "Do you think they've found us?" "Not yet, or they'd have made a move, but they're looking and they're too close for comfort." Lucas's face was grim in the moonlight. "We're going to move out now under cover of darkness." "Is that safe?" "The trails are treacherous even in daylight." "Safer than waiting to be found," Lucas countered. "We'll go slow and stick to the clearest paths. Miguel knows these mountains almost as well as I do." They quietly roused Tamaz and broke camp, taking only what was essential and moving with painstaking care to minimize noise. The moon provided just enough light to navigate, though they had to lead the horses on the steepest sections. For hours they climbed, following a narrow ridge that wound its way deeper into the mountains. The air grew colder as they ascended, their breath forming small clouds in the moonlight. Tamaz, despite his youth, kept pace without complaint, though Molly could see the fatigue in his slumped shoulders. Near dawn, they reached a small plateau with a clear spring bubbling from the rocks. Lucas called a halt to rest the horses and themselves. As they slumped gratefully onto the ground, he surveyed their surroundings with his spyglass. "No sign of pursuit," he reported. "We've made good progress." According to the map, we should reach the first mine by midday. Will we rest here until daylight? Miguel asked, helping Tomás take a drink from the spring. Lucas nodded. 2 hours, then we push on. True to his prediction, by midday they found themselves approaching a narrow ravine that matched the description on the map. A small stream trickled down its center, and the rocky walls rose steeply on either side. "This is it," Lucas said, checking the map once more. The first claim should be about a quarter-mile up this ravine, on the western wall. They proceeded cautiously, eyes scanning for any sign of the mine entrance. It was Tomás who spotted at first a dark opening partially hidden behind a fallen tree and overgrown with brush. "There," he called, pointing excitedly. "Is that it, Señor Lucas?" Lucas dismounted to investigate, approaching the opening with his gun drawn. After a careful inspection, he holstered his weapon and began clearing away the brush. "It's a mine entrance, all right," he confirmed. "And not a natural cave. Look at these tool marks. Someone worked this site." Working together, they cleared enough debris to reveal a small but deliberate tunnel entrance, shored up with timbers that, while weathered, still appeared sound. "Should we go in?" Molly asked, peering into the darkness. Lucas shook his head. "Not without proper lamps and equipment, and we don't need to look here." He pointed to a vein of dark rock running through the wall just inside the entrance. "That's silver ore, not the richest I've seen, but definitely worth mining." Molly stared at the dull, unremarkable-looking stone. "Are you certain?" Lucas extracted a small piece and showed her the distinctive metallic sheen when it caught the light. "I worked in the mines near Leadville for a year before joining the Marshals. This is silver, all right." Miguel examined the ore himself and nodded in agreement. "Good quality. Not exceptional, but steady money for whoever works it." "So the map is genuine," Molly said, relief evident in her voice. "The claims are real." "Let's check one more site to be sure," Lucas suggested. The map shows another entrance about a mile further up. The second site proved even more promising than the first, with a wider tunnel and more accessible veins of ore. As they emerged from examining it, a newfound optimism lightened their mood. "We should reach Wilson by tomorrow evening if we push hard," Lucas said as they remounted. "Once there, we can file the claims in your name and send word to Marshal Johnson." They had traveled perhaps half a mile back down the ravine when a rifle shot echoed off the rocky walls. The bullet struck a tree trunk inches from Lucas's head, showering him with splinters. "Ambush!" he shouted, drawing his pistol as he scanned the ridgeline above them. "Take cover!" More shots followed as they scattered, diving behind rocks and fallen trees. Molly found herself behind a large boulder with Tomás, while Lucas and Miguel took positions on either side of the ravine, returning fire at the unseen attackers. "Stay down," Molly told the frightened boy, drawing her own pistol. She peered cautiously around the edge of the boulder and saw movement on the ridge. At least 3 men, maybe more, working their way down toward them. Lucas caught her eye from his position and signaled for her to stay put. He fired twice more, then darted across the open ground to reach Miguel. After a hurried conference, Miguel moved back to where Molly and Tomás were hiding. "There is another way out of this ravine," he told them quietly. "A small trail leading up the eastern wall. Señor Lucas will cover us while we make for it." "We can't leave him here alone," Molly protested. "He will follow once we are clear," Miguel insisted. "These are his orders. We must protect you and the map." Molly hesitated, torn between the logic of the plan and her fear for Lucas's safety. A bullet ricocheting off their boulder made the decision for her. Tomás flinched violently, and she knew she had to get the boy to safety. "Lead the way," she told Miguel. Keeping low, they crawled from their position toward a cluster of trees that would provide cover for their ascent. Behind them, Lucas increased his rate of fire, drawing the attackers' attention away from their movement. They had almost reached the trees when Molly heard a pained grunt from Lucas's direction. She turned to see him clutching his left shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Despite the wound, he continued firing with his right hand, his face a mask of determination. "Go," he shouted when he saw her looking. "I'm right behind you." Miguel pulled her forward and they scrambled up the steep trail, half climbing, half running as bullets whistled around them. At the top, they found a narrow ledge leading away from the ravine. "Keep going," Miguel urged, pushing Tomás ahead of him. "Follow the ledge around that outcropping. There is a path down the other side." "What about Lucas?" Molly demanded, turning back toward the ravine. Miguel's expression was grim. "If he can, he will follow. If not—" He didn't finish the sentence. "We must hurry. Those men will be coming after us." Heart pounding, Molly made a decision. "Take Tomás and go. I'm going back for Lucas." "Señorita, no, that's not a request, Miguel. Get your son to safety. I'll catch up with you at the meeting point we discussed." She pressed the map into his hands. "Take this. If we don't return by nightfall, continue to Wilson and contact Marshal Johnson." Miguel clearly wanted to argue, but another burst of gunfire from below decided him. "Be careful," he said, grasping her arm briefly before turning to lead Tomás along the ledge. Molly waited until they were safely around the outcropping before making her way back down the trail. The gunfire had lessened, which worried her. Either the attackers were advancing on Lucas's position, or he was no longer able to return fire. She moved as quietly as possible, using trees and rocks for cover. As she neared the bottom, she could hear men's voices, unfamiliar ones, calling to each other as they searched the ravine. "Where'd they go, Hank?" "Must have run off up the ravine." "Jenkins, take Porter and check it out." "What about Owens?" "He ain't going nowhere. That shoulder wound's got him bleeding like a stuck pig." Molly's blood ran cold. Crouching behind a large rock, she peered around to see 3 men standing over Lucas, who was slumped against a tree trunk, his shirt dark with blood. His guns had been taken and his face was pale beneath his tan, but his eyes still blazed with defiance. "Where's the girl, Owens?" One of the men, presumably Hank, prodded Lucas with his boot. "Gone," Lucas answered, his voice strained but steady. "Along with the map." "You boys came all this way for nothing." Hank backhanded him across the face. "Garrett's not going to be happy about that. Maybe we should send him your head as an apology." Lucas spat blood onto the ground. "You're welcome to try." Molly knew she had to act quickly. There were 3 men that she could see, and at least 2 more searching further up the ravine. With only 5 shots in her pistol, she needed to make every one count. Looking around desperately for some advantage, her eyes fell on a pile of loose rocks near the edge of the trail. If she could create a diversion. Moving as silently as possible, Molly positioned herself behind the rocks. Taking a deep breath, she shoved with all her strength, sending the rocks tumbling down into the ravine with a tremendous clatter. The reaction was immediate. All 3 men spun toward the noise, guns raised. "What the hell was that?" one shouted. "Could be the girl," Hank replied. "Porter, check it out." As the man called Porter cautiously approached the fallen rocks, Molly took careful aim and fired. Her bullet caught him in the leg, and he went down with a howl of pain. Before the others could locate her position, she fired again, hitting Hank in the shoulder and sending his shot wide. The 3rd man dove for cover, returning fire wildly in her direction. Molly ducked as bullets chipped away at the rocks around her. When the firing paused, she risked another look and saw Lucas had taken advantage of the confusion to tackle the 3rd man despite his wounded state. They were struggling for control of a knife, rolling on the ground in a desperate grapple. Despite his injury, Lucas managed to pin the man down, but Hank was recovering, reaching for his dropped pistol with his good arm. Molly took aim and fired her third shot, striking the ground inches from Hank's hand. He jerked back with a curse, giving her time to scramble down from her position and run toward Lucas. By the time she reached him, Lucas had knocked out his opponent with a powerful blow to the jaw. He looked up at Molly, surprise and anger warring in his expression. "I told you to get away," he growled, struggling to his feet. "You're welcome," Molly retorted, keeping her pistol trained on Hank, who was now sitting up, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Can you walk?" "Yeah." Lucas swayed slightly but remained upright. "But the others will be back soon. We need to move." A shout from further up the ravine confirmed his words. The remaining men had heard the gunfire and were returning. "This way," Molly urged, helping Lucas toward the trail she descended. "Miguel and Tomás are waiting for us on the other side of the ridge." They made their way up the trail as quickly as Lucas's condition allowed, the sounds of pursuit growing closer behind them. At the top, Lucas had to pause, leaning heavily against a boulder as he caught his breath. His face was alarmingly pale, and fresh blood was soaking through the makeshift bandage he'd applied to his shoulder. "You need a doctor," Molly said, fear tightening her chest. "What I need is for you to be safe," Lucas countered, "which won't happen if we don't keep moving." He pushed himself upright with visible effort. "The ledge gets narrow ahead. Stay close to the wall and don't look down." The ledge indeed narrowed to barely the width of their boots in places, with a sheer drop of hundreds of feet to one side. They inched along carefully, Molly supporting Lucas as best she could while maintaining her own balance. They had almost reached the outcropping Miguel had mentioned when a bullet struck the rock wall above their heads, sending stone fragments flying. Molly glanced back to see one of Garrett's men at the start of the ledge, taking aim for another shot. "Keep going," Lucas urged, pushing her ahead of him. "I'll hold them off." "With what?" Molly demanded. "They took your guns." In answer, Lucas drew a small knife from his boot, a pitiful weapon against rifles, but his expression was determined. "Just go." Another shot rang out, this one coming from beyond the outcropping. The man pursuing them jerked backward, dropping his rifle as he clutched his chest. He teetered on the ledge for a horrifying moment before plummeting into the ravine below. Miguel appeared around the outcropping, rifle in hand. "Quickly," he called. "More are coming." With renewed urgency, they made it to safer ground. Tomás was waiting with the horses in a small clearing beyond the ridge. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of Lucas's blood-soaked shirt. "We need to bandage that properly," Molly said, helping Lucas to sit on a fallen log. "No time," Lucas insisted. "Those shots will have alerted the others. We need to put as much distance between us and this place as possible." Despite his protests, Molly insisted on at least cleaning the wound and applying a fresh bandage from their supplies. The bullet had gone clean through his shoulder, fortunate in that it didn't need to be removed, but concerning for the amount of blood he'd lost. "This will have to do for now," she said, tying off the bandage. "But we're getting you to a doctor as soon as possible." They mounted up, with Lucas grimly holding onto his saddle horn to stay upright. Miguel led the way, choosing paths that would be difficult to follow and occasionally doubling back to confuse their trail. By nightfall, they had descended from the mountains and were traveling through rolling foothills once more. They made a cold camp that night, not risking a fire that might give away their position. Lucas's condition had worsened. Fever had set in, and he drifted in and out of consciousness as Molly bathed his forehead with cool water from a nearby stream. "How far to Wilson?" she asked Miguel quietly as Tomás slept nearby. "At our current pace, we could reach it by late tomorrow," Miguel replied. "But Señor Lucas—" He glanced worriedly at his employer, He needs a doctor sooner. Molly made a decision. There's a small settlement marked on the map about 10 miles from here. It's not on our direct route to Wilson, but it might have someone who can help. Miguel nodded. San Miguel. It is mostly Mexican and Indian families, but there is an old woman there, a curandera, a healer. She has helped many when no doctor was available. Then that's where we'll go, Molly said firmly. At first light, the settlement of San Miguel was little more than a cluster of adobe buildings around a small plaza, but to Molly, it looked like salvation. They rode in shortly before noon, drawing curious stares from the residents. Lucas was barely conscious by then, staying in the saddle only through sheer determination. Miguel spoke rapidly in Spanish to an older man who approached them, explaining their situation. The man nodded and led them to a small house on the edge of the settlement. An elderly woman with gray-streaked black hair and keen eyes came out to meet them. "This is Doña Esperanza," Miguel explained to Molly. "She will help." The old woman took one look at Lucas and began issuing commands in a mixture of Spanish and English. Within minutes, Lucas had been carried into her home and laid on a clean cot. Doña Esperanza examined his wound with practiced hands, her face grave. "Infection," she pronounced. "Bad, but not too late. I will treat him, but he must rest. No travel for 3 days." "We may not have 3 days," Molly said worriedly. "There are men looking for us." Doña Esperanza nodded as if this was a common problem. "My sons and grandsons will watch. No strangers come to San Miguel without us knowing." She began gathering herbs and bottles from a shelf. "Now go." "Let me work." Relegated to the small front room of the house, Molly paced anxiously while Miguel took Tomás to arrange for their horses to be tended. Through the doorway, she could see Doña Esperanza working over Lucas, applying poultices to his wound and feeding him some bitter-smelling concoction that made him grimace even in his semi-conscious state. Hours passed. The old woman worked tirelessly, changing bandages, applying fresh poultices, and murmuring what sounded like prayers or incantations as she worked. Finally, as evening approached, she emerged from the sick room, wiping her hands on her apron. "The fever will break tonight," she told Molly confidently. "If he is as strong as he looks, he will recover." "Thank you," Molly said fervently. "I don't know how we can repay your kindness." The old woman waved this away. "Miguel says this man has been good to him and his boy. That is payment enough." Her dark eyes studied Molly shrewdly. "You love him, yes?" The direct question caught Molly off guard. We haven't known each other very long." Doña Esperanza chuckled. "Time means nothing to the heart. I saw my husband once when his family passed through my village, and I knew. We were married 52 years before he left this world." She patted Molly's hand. "Your eyes, when you look at him, they are the same as mine were." Before Molly could respond, Miguel returned with news that lodging had been arranged for them with a family in the village. Doña Esperanza insisted that Molly get proper rest, promising to send for her if Lucas's condition changed. Reluctantly, Molly allowed herself to be led to a small but clean room in a nearby home. Despite her worry for Lucas, exhaustion claimed her almost as soon as her head touched the pillow. She was awakened before dawn by a soft knock at her door. Miguel stood there, his expression urgent. "Riders have been spotted approaching from the north," he said quietly. 6 men, heavily armed. They match the description of Garrett's gang. Molly's heart raced. "How did they find us?" "Perhaps they guessed we would seek help at the nearest settlement," Miguel suggested. "Or they may have followed our trail. It does not matter now. We must decide what to do." Molly quickly dressed and followed Miguel to Doña Esperanza's house. To her relief, Lucas was awake, propped up on the cot. His color was better, though he still looked weak. I heard, he said as Molly entered. We need to move. You're not strong enough, Molly protested. I'm not dying here and putting these people at risk, Lucas countered, attempting to sit up fully. He winced but managed to swing his legs over the side of the cot. Doña Esperanza entered, carrying a bundle of clean clothes. My grandsons, she explained, handing them to Lucas. Yours are ruined with blood. As Lucas dressed with Miguel's help, the old woman drew Molly aside. There is a path behind my house that leads to the river. Follow it for half a mile and you will find a small cabin where my late husband would go to fish. It is well hidden. You can rest there while your man regains his strength. What about Garrett's men? Molly asked. They'll search the village. Doña Esperanza's eyes twinkled with mischief. Let me worry about them. We know how to deal with such men. They will find nothing here but innocent families going about their business. Despite her concern, Molly had to smile at the old woman's confidence. Thank you again, for everything. With Lucas leaning heavily on Miguel, they slipped out the back of the house just as dawn was breaking. Tomás had already gone ahead with their few supplies, taking a circuitous route to avoid being spotted. They followed the path as directed, moving slowly due to Lucas's condition. The cabin, when they reached it, was indeed well hidden among a grove of cottonwood trees near the riverbank. Small but sturdy, it offered a defensible position and a clear view of the approaching path. They had been there less than an hour when Tomás, who had been keeping watch, reported riders approaching San Miguel from the direction they had come. Through Miguel's spyglass, Molly could make out Silas Garrett himself at the head of 5 riders. Will they be safe? Molly asked anxiously, thinking of Doña Esperanza and the other villagers. Maybe we should have kept going. You've never seen a small village close ranks against outsiders, have you? Lucas said, his voice weak but amused. Garrett will get nothing from them but blank stares and shrugs. His prediction proved accurate. Through the spyglass, they watched as Garrett and his men rode from house to house, clearly questioning the residents. Several times they entered buildings to search, only to emerge looking frustrated. After nearly 2 hours, they gathered in the center of the village, where they appeared to argue among themselves. They're splitting up, Miguel reported as the group finally dispersed. 3 heading back the way they came, the others continuing west toward Wilson. They're covering their bases, Lucas said grimly. Garrett's not a fool. He knows we're either hiding somewhere nearby or making for Wilson to file the claims. He attempted to stand but swayed dangerously. Molly pushed him gently back onto the bed. You're not going anywhere today. The map is safe with Miguel, and Marshal Johnson will be in Wilson soon. We can afford to wait until you're stronger. For once, Lucas didn't argue. His brief burst of energy had clearly cost him, and he sank back onto the pillow, his face drawn with pain and exhaustion. They spent 2 more days at the cabin, with Miguel occasionally slipping into the village for supplies and news. Doña Esperanza sent more medicines and food, along with word that Garrett's men had not returned. Lucas's condition improved steadily under Molly's care, the infection receding and his strength gradually returning. On the morning of the 3rd day, he was able to walk around the cabin and even down to the riverbank without assistance. Watching him test his recovering strength, Molly felt a profound sense of relief and something deeper, a warmth that spread through her whenever their eyes met. That evening, as they sat outside the cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lucas finally broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. We should reach Wilson tomorrow if we leave at first light, he said, his eyes on the fading colors in the west. Once the claims are filed and Marshal Johnson arrives, you'll be safe. We'll all be safe, Molly corrected. Lucas nodded but didn't look at her. You'll need to decide what you want to do after that, With the silver mines in your name, you'll have options. You could return to Boston or maybe Denver, start over somewhere civilized. Molly studied his profile, noting the carefully neutral expression he was maintaining. Is that what you think I should do? It's what would make sense, Lucas replied, still not meeting her gaze. You're not made for this life, Molly. The isolation, the hardship. You deserve better than a half-wild ranch in the middle of nowhere. Shouldn't that be my decision to make? Molly asked softly. When Lucas finally turned to look at her, she continued, These past weeks have changed me, Lucas. I'm not the same woman who arrived from Boston expecting parlors and piano recitals. I've discovered strengths in myself I never knew existed. You've been brave, Lucas acknowledged. But that doesn't mean it means, Molly interrupted, that I know what I want now. And it's not Boston or Denver or any city. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. It's here, with you, if you want me. The vulnerability in her words hung in the air between them. Lucas stared at her, conflicting emotions playing across his face. Molly, he began, his voice rough with feeling, you don't know what you're saying. I've done things, seen things. I'm not the man you think I am. You're exactly the man I think you are, Molly countered. Honorable, brave, and far too stubborn for your own good. She moved closer, placing her hand over his. I know you've been alone for a long time, so have I in my way, but we don't have to be alone anymore. Lucas looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. Something in his expression shifted, a barrier falling away. Slowly, he raised his good arm and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch achingly gentle. I never expected you, he murmured, riding into my life like a whirlwind, turning everything upside down. His fingers traced the curve of her cheek. I tried not to care too much. Told myself you'd leave once this was over and that would be for the best, but the thought of you going. He shook his head. It feels like losing something I can't bear to lose. Molly leaned into his touch, her heart racing. Then don't lose me, keep me, here with you. In answer, Lucas bent his head and kissed her, softly at first, then with growing intensity as she responded eagerly. His arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and Molly felt as though something that had been missing all her life had finally clicked into place. When they finally parted, both breathless, Lucas pressed his forehead to hers. Are you sure, Molly, really sure? This life isn't easy. I'm sure, she whispered, more sure than I've ever been of anything. The journey to Wilson the next day was tense but uneventful. They traveled together, watchful for any sign of Garrett's men, but encountered only a few farmers and a stage-coach along the way. By late afternoon, the familiar buildings of the town came into view. Their first stop was the telegraph office, where they found a message waiting from Marshal Johnson announcing his arrival on the following day's stage. Next, they proceeded to the land office, where Molly filed formal claims on the silver mines, establishing her legal ownership. These look to be in order, Miss Zane, the clerk said, stamping the documents. Congratulations. You're now the owner of 5 silver mining claims. As they emerged from the land office, Lucas suddenly tensed, his hand moving to his gun. Molly followed his gaze and saw Silas Garrett himself standing across the street, flanked by 2 of his men. The outlaw's cold eyes fixed on them, his mouth twisting in a smile that held no humor. Inside, Lucas ordered, pushing Molly back toward the land office door. Miguel, get her to safety. Before they could move, shots rang out not from Garrett but from further down the street. 2 deputies from the sheriff's office had emerged, rifles raised. Garrett, one shouted. Drop your weapons. You're under arrest. For a tense moment, it seemed Garrett would fight. His hand hovered near his pistol, and his men looked ready to draw. Then, with a snarl of frustration, he slowly raised his hands. This isn't over, he called to Molly as the deputies approached to disarm him. That map was rightfully mine. Actually, it wasn't, came a new voice. A tall man in a dusty duster with a U.S. Marshal's badge stepped out of the general store. Silas Garrett, you're wanted for bank robbery, murder, and various other crimes across 2 territories. He tipped his hat to Lucas. Owens, good to see you're still breathing. Johnson, Lucas nodded to the marshal. You're early. Marshal Johnson grinned. Got your telegrams and decided to push on ahead of schedule. Good thing, too. He jerked his head toward Garrett, who was now being handcuffed by the deputies. Been after this one for 3 years. With Garrett and his men securely in custody, they gathered at the town's small hotel to explain everything to Marshal Johnson. The lawman listened carefully to their account of the map, the mines, and Garrett's pursuit. You did well, he told Molly when they'd finished. Most folks would have crumbled under that kind of pressure. I had help, she said, glancing at Lucas with a smile. The best kind, Johnson agreed, looking between them knowingly. I'll be taking Garrett back to Denver for trial. With the evidence we've gathered, and your testimonies, he'll be facing the hangman's noose for certain. That evening, after securing rooms at the hotel for Molly and the others, Lucas took her for a walk down Wilson's quiet Main Street. The setting sun cast long shadows across the boardwalks, and a cool breeze carried the scent of pine from the distant mountains. So, Lucas said, his hand warm around hers, what will you do with your silver mines, Miss Zane? Molly considered the question. I think I'll hire someone reputable to manage them. Use the proceeds to build something lasting. She looked up at him. Maybe expand a certain ranch. Add some improvements. A bigger house, perhaps, with a proper garden. Lucas's eyebrows rose. You've given this some thought. I have, Molly admitted. I've also thought about starting a school here in Wilson. There are enough children now and more coming as the town grows. They deserve a proper education. A school teacher and a rancher, Lucas mused. Quite the combination. Too much. Molly asked, suddenly uncertain. Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. No, he said softly. It's perfect. You're perfect. He hesitated, then added, I love you, Molly Zane. I think I have since you stood in my barn with that little Derringer, determined to fight even when you were terrified. Molly's heart soared at his words. I love you too, Lucas Owens. Enough to build a life with you, wherever that may lead us. Lucas glanced around the quiet street, then back at her. I didn't plan to do this here, but I don't want to wait another moment. To Molly's astonishment, he dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. Molly Zane, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't offer you the luxury you were born to, but I swear I'll spend every day trying to make you happy. Tears of joy filled Molly's eyes. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Lucas rose and gathered her in his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that belied his strength. Around them, a few townspeople applauded, including Mrs. Wilson, who stood beaming in the doorway of her general store. Well, it's about time, the shopkeeper called. I was beginning to think Lucas would never get around to it. Laughing, they accepted congratulations from the small crowd that had gathered. For the first time since her father's death, Molly felt a sense of true belonging, not just to a place, but to a person, to a future bright with promise. The wedding took place 3 weeks later on Lucas's ranch, with the entire population of Wilson in attendance. Miguel stood as Lucas's best man, while Mrs. Wilson had taken Molly under her wing, helping with her dress and serving as a surrogate mother for the occasion. They exchanged vows on the front porch of the ranch house, which had already begun to transform under Molly's influence. Flower boxes now graced the windows, and fresh curtains hung inside. Plans for an addition to accommodate their future family were already drawn up, with construction set to begin once the harvest season ended. Marshal Johnson returned from Denver for the ceremony, bringing news that Silas Garrett had been convicted and would hang for his crimes. The Marshal also brought an unexpected gift, a letter from Molly's father's former colleague at the bank in Boston, explaining that Franklin Zane had discovered the map among old records and had been investigating its authenticity, intending it as a surprise legacy for his daughter. "He wanted to secure your future," Lucas told Molly privately after they'd read the letter. "And in a way he did, just not how he imagined." The celebration lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the county. As the evening waned, Lucas led his new wife away from the festivities to a quiet spot beneath the stars, the same porch where they had sat those weeks ago, discovering their feelings for each other. "Happy, Mrs. Owens?" he asked, drawing her close. "Completely," Molly answered, leaning into his embrace. "Though it still feels like a dream sometimes, to think that all of this began with running for my life through the wilderness." Lucas chuckled. "Not the most traditional beginning, I'll grant you." His expression grew more serious. "When I found you behind that log, I was just doing what needed doing. I never imagined you'd change my life so completely." "You saved me from those outlaws," Molly acknowledged. "But you know what's remarkable? You think I rescued you from your loneliness, but the truth is we rescued each other." As the stars wheeled overhead and the sounds of celebration drifted from the barn, they sealed this truth with a kiss, a promise of the life they would build together, forged in danger but flourishing in love. 5 years later, Lucas stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching as Molly led their 4-year-old son, Franklin, and 2-year-old daughter, Esperanza, in a game of chase across the yard. The sound of their laughter carried on the summer breeze, mingling with the distant lowing of cattle and the clatter of workers at the new barn they were raising. The silver mines had proven even more profitable than expected, allowing them to expand the ranch significantly. But more important than the material improvements were the changes in the community. The school Molly had established now served 28 children from Wilson and surrounding homesteads. Miguel had married a widow from San Miguel and built a home of his own on land Lucas had deeded to him, while Tomás was preparing to attend college in Denver, the first from their community to do so. As Lucas watched his family play, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed. The loneliness that had once been his constant companion was now a distant memory, replaced by a home filled with love and purpose. Molly looked up, catching his eye across the yard. Her smile, still as radiant as the day they met, warmed him to his core. She said something to the children, then made her way to the porch, slightly out of breath from their game. "Admiring your handiwork, Mr. Owens," she teased, gesturing to their thriving ranch. "Admiring my good fortune, Mrs. Owens," he corrected, pulling her into his arms. "Every single day." As their lips met in a kiss that held all the passion of their early days and all the depth of their years together, Lucas knew with absolute certainty that some treasures were far more precious than silver, and that the greatest adventures began not with a map, but with an open heart.